Many Republican lawmakers have hedged on whether or not they're going to support, endorse, or support but not endorse Donald Trump, who every indication is will be the Republican presidential nominee. Most recently, U.S. House Speaker Paul Ryan, we're talking about the most powerful Republican in the United States right now, told CNN he's not ready to support Trump. This is the top ranking Republican in the United States. He will be the chairman of the Republican National Convention in Cleveland this summer. Can you imagine the message it would send if the guy running the show at the nomination event is not supporting the nominee? Here's how Paul Ryan said it on CNN.
Jake, how are you doing today?
So, Mr. Speaker, you have said throughout this process that you will support the Republican presidential nominee. Now you have a presumptive nominee, Donald Trump. Will you support him?
Well, to be perfectly candid with you, Jake, I'm just not ready to do that at this point. I'm not there right now. And I hope to, though, and I want to. But I think what is required is that we unify this party. And I think the bulk of the burden on unifying the party will have to come from our presumptive nominee. I don't want to underplay what he accomplished. He needs to be congratulated for an enormous accomplishment.
Okay.
For winning.
We can stop there, I think. We get the point. I do dislike Paul Ryan slightly less now, although I think in the end he is going to support Donald Trump. And he made clear at the end of the interview that no matter whether you support Trump or not, no Republican should be supporting Hillary Clinton, who he believes will be the Democratic nominee. We also recently heard that both Jeb Bush and Mitt Romney will not be supporting Donald Trump. At least it doesn't appear that way based on their recent comments. So let's get to the real question I have. What I want to propose to you is that we might be at the beginning of another party realignment, but one that would be very different from past realignments that we've seen. And I'll explain. Party realignments can happen in any number of ways. Well, at least in a number of ways. Demographics can change so that a party that was a contingent of a party that was viable alone is no longer viable. We can see new parties or coalitions created. We don't need this yet, Lewis. Well, this is coming up much later. We can see new coalitions created. We see coalitions go away, etc. I'll give you an example. In the early 1800s, we had the first party system. It was Federalists and Democratic Republicans. In 1824, there were 4 Democratic Republicans that ran for president, and John Quincy Adams was ultimately elected. And after the election, Andrew Jackson split off from the Democratic Republicans, forming the Democrats. Jackson was eventually elected himself, and then another party formed around Adams and Henry Clay called the National Republican Party, and then eventually the Whig Party. And then you ended up with a conflict between Democrats and Whigs. Political ideologies shifted, and you had a realignment. There were other realignments. There was one in the 1850s and 60s around the Civil War. In the 1930s, you had a realignment around FDR's New Deal. The one maybe you're most familiar with is from the 1960s and 70s. This one was around the Civil Rights Act and issues of civil rights. This is why it's mostly irrelevant when you hear today Republicans say, hey, we're the party of Lincoln. We were the ones who freed the slaves, blah, blah, blah. It's essentially irrelevant because we've seen a number of realignments since that time. After the '64 Civil Rights Act passed, many white conservative Democrats from the South became Republicans. So the values voters, so-called values voters, became Republicans based on opposition to abortion and gay marriage. Let's get to today. Could what's happening today in the Republican Party be a realignment or the start of one? We saw the Tea Party influx into the Republican Party in the 2010 midterms as a sort of mini realignment. But Lewis, that was exactly as we predicted. Those ideas were integrated into the GOP.
Yeah, they were integrated. I mean, I think what we've been seeing, well, would we agree that the party has been shrinking?
Well, certainly there has been less room for the so-called big tent that the Republican Party claims to offer.
Yeah. And so, I mean, what I see is the party shrinking, but becoming more extreme.
Well, let's get to that. Could the implosion we're seeing the Republican Party have around Trump be the catalyst for a realignment? V.O. Key wrote in 1955 an article called A Theory of Critical Elections, and he says you need 3 criteria for a political realignment. Let's take a look at those. Number 1, a critical presidential election in which the electorate changes its voting pattern. Well, we have that, right? I mean, we're seeing Republican voting patterns change drastically. You have evangelical voters, the so-called moral majority, voting for the guy from New York who cheated on one wife, whose current wife posed nude or almost nude, now I forget, who said Planned Parenthood has helped millions of women, who has no problem with transgender women in the women's room. That is a huge voting pattern change. We have criteria number one. Criteria number two for a realignment, a major conflict or issues that divide the electorate. Well, we see that on both sides. On the Democratic side, conflict over whether progressives should get behind Hillary Clinton if Bernie Sanders is not the nominee, or pursue a burn it all down strategy. On the Republican side, major Republican officials aren't supporting the primary candidate. We have conflict. And then number three, a political party weak enough for either a new party to take control or to reflect significant change in voter characteristics. Okay, well, Lewis, the election has the potential to see that change in voter characteristics. So we certainly have at least, I would say, 2.5 of the 3 characteristics needed for a political realignment, probably more likely if Trump wins than if Trump loses. If he loses, probably chalked up to an anomaly that just didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see the Republican elected officials really changing much here, right? I don't think their opinions are going to change. I don't think their views are going to change. I don't think their rhetoric is going to change. They're against the presumptive nominee. That's fine. Republicans are going to vote for Donald Trump. And I think that whatever happens, next election cycle, it'll just kind of go back to being the same as it was before Donald Trump entered the scene at all.
Well, we'll see. I think if he wins, there's a potential for a big difference there. I think the caveat is if you saw the really far-right Republicans supporting a really far-right candidate, that would more likely lead to a real split. But right now you have this wacky situation where the far-right Republicans are actually supporting Donald Trump, who on many issues is more to the left of Hillary Clinton. And that may be a sort of a outlier confusion that's going on, which might not actually lead to a realignment. Send me your thoughts on this. Today's sponsor is Casper Mattresses, and I'm actually now sleeping on a Casper mattress, and I love it. And for a long time, I was sort of resistant to the idea that it really matters what mattress you have. And I thought, hey, I'm sleeping pretty well. What difference could a different mattress make? And it actually makes a huge difference. And now I've been completely converted into the idea that the mattress you sleep on matters. And you can get $50 towards any mattress purchase by going to casper.com/Pakman and using the code Pakman, Pakman. Check it out. There is a risk-free trial and return policy. If you don't like the mattress, Casper will come and pick it up at their expense. No risk to you. Casper.com/Pakman. The code is Pakman, Pakman. Try it.